This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Go to squarespace.com/theplainbagel to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using code theplainbagel. Ethics and investing are probably two words you don't often find together. From scandals to pollution, greedy executives to blatant rights violations, corporations have carried out many environmental and social harms over the years in the name of profits. It's something that leaves investors in a tough predicament. On the one hand, we often need investing to fuel our wealth and help us accomplish our financial objectives like retirement. But on the other, investing can enable these organizations to carry out wrongdoings. Now, investing in general doesn't have to involve selling your soul to the corporate devil. But recently we've seen the rise of E.S.G investing, an approach that considers not only the financial gain of a position, but also the direct and indirect effects the business has on the well-being of others. It's a really cool strategy that has gained meaningful ground. But as life would have it, even this form of ethical investing has its shortcomings. And while it's important to put your money into companies you can truly stand behind, relying just on the ESG label can leave you paying higher costs while still investing in companies you wish to avoid. So let's explore the definitely not controversial topic of ethical investing on today's episode of The Plain Bagel. Traditional financial models have long focused almost exclusively on monetary factors. If a project was expected to make money, it was a go, even if it caused a greater cost to others. Because of this, regulations have been introduced over time to ensure that corporations who had a tendency to focus exclusively on profitability operated in a way that aligned with the interests of other stakeholders. From minimum wages to pollution restrictions, these regulations have come to be fairly broad in their scope. But while these rules can prevent blatantly harmful actions, there are many gray areas that regulations simply don't address. And as generations have become more aware, educated, and active on social and environmental issues, investors have started taking it upon themselves to support only those companies that align with their own values. This approach goes by many names: ethical, socially responsible, sustainable investing. But it is often broadly referred to as E.S.G investing, which stands for environmental, social, and governance. In the world of stocks, these are the factors considered when trying to determine the ethics of a firm's operations. Environmental considerations include pollution and animal welfare. Social factors include human rights, employee compensation, and community engagement. And corporate governance refers to diversity and how a company manages those at the top. E.S.G investing involves analyzing these three considerations and incorporating the findings into standard financial models so that how a firm is run is considered alongside its profitability. And while there's no standardized approach to the practice, there are two broad strategies that are used: negative screening and positive screening. Negative screening involves removing companies from the universe of stocks to be invested in based on certain traits the investor is looking to avoid. Tobacco, firearms, and gambling are all areas that frequently get the boot with this strategy. Other times, the approach involves removing companies with certain red flags, like those with a history of human rights violations, or companies that have committed fraud. Positive screening, on the other hand, is more proactive and looks to invest in companies that are actively benefiting or supporting positive initiatives while operating their business. This includes renewable or green investing, where investors put their money behind wind, solar, and other sustainable energy companies, as well as investing in companies with more equal opportunity employment practices and diverse management teams. Once the universe of stocks has been narrowed down, an E.S.G fund may look to score their holdings based on the E.S.G factors, enabling them to identify which companies are doing their part and which ones are doing the bare minimum. How an investor or fund weighs these factors against the traditional financial analysis can vary. Some funds will simply carry out traditional financial analysis and put more of their money in the stocks with higher ESG scores. Other funds will use the ESG factors as the primary determinant to their investment decisions. Regardless, the approach looks to better balance traditional financial models with the ethics of the holdings themselves. Now, ESG investing isn't the only approach to ethical investing. There are other methods that are worth mentioning here. Impact investing, for example, looks for investments to not just produce financial return, but to achieve some explicit positive outcome, while community investments seek to fund underserved communities to help them better develop. While these approaches certainly have social value, they do put more weight on the social and environmental outcome than the financial benefit to the individual. And as a result, they tend to be higher risk, with many facing the real possibility of becoming a mere donation. That's not to say there's no value in these areas, but when managing our finances, our goal should be to ensure we're taken care of. And while Bill Gates' waste to drinking water machine is a really cool innovation that could really help out a lot of people, it doesn't make for a great retirement investment for your average Joe. So for many, ESG offers a better balance, providing investors a chance of reaching their financial objectives while still supporting their values. And it's a practice that's become very popular over time. In fact, the amount of money in sustainable mutual funds is estimated to have grown from under $500 billion in 2013 to $750 billion in 2018, with the amount forecasted to reach $1.8 trillion by 2028. The rise in popularity has also led many companies to be more proactive on their ESG front. BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, recently released a letter highlighting that ESG factors should be the new standard for investors, while simultaneously releasing a number of ESG products. Companies like Nike have also been more active on making donations and standing behind social causes. And as the social spotlight turns on corporations, many have promised to change their ways in favor of more socially responsible strategies. As an investor, it's an encouraging thing to see. I mean, who doesn't want to do good and make money in the process? But while ESG investing certainly has its merits, there are some important shortcomings that you need to be aware of before you go buying any ESG funds. For one, ESG investing is not a standardized approach, and you may find that an ESG fund doesn't actually align with your own values. Just like the field of ethics itself, where different schools of thought provide different answers to the same important ethical questions. Investment firms use varying criteria for analyzing ESG factors, and there's no standard that dictates how lenient a fund can be on certain issues. For example, there are many ESG funds that hold fossil fuel companies, and while this is obviously a debated area that I'm not going to take a side on, an environmentalist may be surprised to find a fossil fuel company in their ESG fund, even if it is the most efficient operator in their space. On top of this, while there are rating companies that provide ESG scores that people can reference, scores for the same company can vary drastically between different rating agencies, showing just how little agreement there actually is on certain issues. ESG factors can also actually be fairly difficult to analyze. There are a lot of details to consider, including a company's operations, their supply chains, their employees, their partners, so on and so forth. And in the US, companies aren't actually required to track their ESG performance, which means we're often forced to make our decisions based on the self-advertised information put forth by the firm. Not only does this make finding red flags difficult, but we've seen many companies greenwash their operations, where they take on minor initiatives or provide false promises to give the impression of some larger ethical operation. Finally, while there are clearly social benefits, there are some financial shortcomings to the investor when it comes to ESG investing. Strict ESG criteria can greatly limit the diversification of your portfolio. An investor who only wants to invest in renewable, zero-waste positions will have a much smaller pool of stocks to choose from than other investors, and will be heavily exposed to the unique risks of those companies. And sadly, there is a cost to ESG. Because ESG funds and high-ranking ESG stocks garner a lot of demand, they can actually be more expensive. ESG funds tend to charge a higher fee than traditional funds, while highly visible ethical companies tend to trade at a higher multiple than peers, meaning you need to pay more for the same profitability than you would with a standard stock. These cons are what make a seemingly easy decision between ethical and traditional investing a bit trickier. And it can certainly be discouraging to think that those trying to be good people have to pay more. Now, some investors might believe the benefits are certainly worth the cons and the costs. And even with my superior judgment, I'm not here to tell you the right approach to ESG investing. But even if you think ESG funds are a scam, I should highlight that investors can still benefit from investing ethically and considering ESG factors themselves. Companies with proactive social and environmental policies usually face lower regulatory and legal risks. Regulations tend to become more strict over time, so a company that's proactive in its policies is less likely to face a lawsuit or need to make a major change. We've also seen customers become more active in supporting and blacklisting companies based on their values, which makes it more important for companies to be run ethically. It's why a lot of investment companies, even those that aren't explicitly running ESG funds, consider these ethical factors when making investment decisions, believing them to be a good indicator of the risks faced by a firm. Finally, some research actually suggests that certain progressive strategies, including having a more diverse leader base, actually improves the stock's performance, although it is unclear whether being progressive improves profitability or if being profitable simply enables companies to be more progressive. Regardless, there's something to be said for considering ESG factors, even if you stick to traditional investment approaches. And if you invest in stocks yourself, there are some ways that you can look to ensure your holdings align with your own values. Most companies will list in their regulatory filings the societal and environmental impacts of their operations, as well as the initiatives they have in that area. And you'll typically find an ESG section in their annual reports, so you can screen companies based on issues you care about. When it comes to governance, you can broadly gauge a company by looking into the committees they have set up to govern management, as these groups tend to be the independent guidance for management, as well as the company's history of lawsuits, employee pay, so on and so forth. If you don't have the time or expertise to invest in individual companies yourself, it's easy enough to find mutual funds and ETFs with these buzzwords of ESG and sustainable in their name. But if you're going to take on the costs that may come with this approach, it's worth taking the time to go through the fund's prospectus to determine what criteria the fund manager is using to screen their investments, ensuring that this approach aligns with your own expectations. At the end of the day, ethical investing is surprisingly a highly debated topic in investments. Some professionals believe the job of an advisor is only to earn their client the best return possible, something that may require putting money in companies with poor social optics. Others believe that investors have the power and duty to support companies that will have a positive impact on the world. Needless to say, there are many gray areas where even the most ethical of investors disagree. Are fossil fuels immoral if the area is necessary for economies and transportation as they currently exist? Is Amazon a tyrant if it enabled many consumers to continue shopping for necessities through a pandemic? Is AI promising or a tool that will enable the rise of totalitarian states? Nothing is clear cut, but at the very least, taking the extra step to consider ESG factors is something that should not only help align your holdings with your values, but it might just lower the risk of your portfolio as a whole. Thanks for watching. I'd love to hear your civil comments on the issues raised and your thoughts on ethical investing as a whole in the section down below. As always, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications. For the Plain Bagel, my name's Richard Coffin. Thanks for joining me today. High horse, away! One point of debate in ethics is the idea of big companies taking all the business from smaller firms. With the sheer economies of scale and massive size of operations, smaller business owners need every edge they can get to compete. And I think one thing we've seen in this downturn is how important having an online presence can be. But for many, building a website is a daunting task, which is why I suggest people check out Squarespace if they're looking for a place to get started. Squarespace sponsored today's video, and they offer a structured website builder that lets you run an e-commerce page, send out email campaigns, share social media and videos, and much, much more. They're native to the browser, meaning that you can edit from anywhere you have internet access. And it's very beginner friendly. Users can pick from a bunch of already awesome templates to get started and just drag in their own content. When I was building my own page, I found it really handy because I didn't have a lot of time to dedicate to the process. And yet I was able to get a professional looking website pretty quickly. It's a great service, and best of all, it's free to try out, meaning that you can build your entire website before paying a cent. And when you get things the way you want them and are ready to launch, using coupon code ThePlainBagel will not only support the channel, but you'll save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So if you're looking to kickstart your online presence, go check out Squarespace and start creating today.